I never imagined I would see Jason Hale again. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the divorce papers were signed. Not after I changed the locks on my apartment. Not after I blocked his number for the 100th time. 2 full years. 2 years filled with therapy sessions, breathing exercises, and the constant effort to convince myself that I could live without glancing over my shoulder. 2 years spent rebuilding a life he had once dismantled brick by brick, habit by habit, until I no longer recognized the woman I had become. And then suddenly he was there, standing in the deserted parking lot of the supermarket on a rainy Seattle evening, leaning against my car as if it belonged to him, as if he still owned me. My arms were full of groceries, bread, milk, eggs, the simple things that made me feel normal, and my heart immediately hammered at the sight of that familiar silhouette. His tall frame, the confident posture, the smile that once made me feel safe now twisting my stomach into knots. I thought about turning around, pretending I hadn't seen him, maybe hiding inside the supermarket until he left, but that would mean abandoning my car, my groceries, and once again choosing to run. And I was so tired of running. "Ava," he called out, his voice smooth and familiar, like poison wrapped in velvet. My nerves tightened, my fingers curled around my keys, and I forced a deep breath to steady myself. "Jason, leave. That's all you have to say to me?" He stepped away from my car and blocked the driver's side door. "After everything we had?" "Everything we had?" I echoed, my voice sharper than I intended. "You mean everything you destroyed?" His jaw tightened, and I recognized that look, the look I used to fear, the one that signaled I had said the wrong thing, crossed some invisible boundary he set but never spoke aloud. "Don't be dramatic. You always blow things out of proportion." I tried to move past him, but he mirrored every step, like a dance I no longer wanted to be part of and couldn't escape from. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The parking lot was nearly empty, only a few cars scattered under dim yellow lights, no one close enough to hear, no one close enough to care. "Jason, I don't want to do this. Let me go." He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "I already let go, remember? I signed the papers. I gave you your little freedom. And what have you done with it? You look miserable, Ava. Just like I said you would." "I'm fine," I said, though my hands were shaking hard enough that I nearly dropped the bags. "No, you're not." He stepped closer, close enough for me to smell the cologne he always wore, the scent that used to cling to my clothes, my hair, my skin. "You think you're better without me? Look at yourself. Still alone, still broken, still that scared little girl who can't make a single decision without me." I wanted to scream, to throw the bags at him and run, but my body froze, trapped between cars, between the past and the present. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to remind me that he could tighten his grip any time he wanted. Or what? He leaned in, his face close enough for me to taste the memory of fear, and I hated how small and helpless I felt. "Who are you going to call, Ava? Who? You have no one. That's the problem. You think you can walk away. You think someone will save you, but no one will." Tears stung my eyes, and I hated myself for that. Hated that after all this time, all the therapy, all the promises I made to myself, he could still make me cry with just a few words. "Don't cry," he said, that familiar, contemptuous tone rolling off his tongue. "No one is coming for you." That sentence, the curse, he repeated every time I broke down. I tried to yank my hand away, but he tightened his grip. "Jason, please." "Please what? Please let you go? Please pretend I didn't waste years of my life on you? Please act like you're not still the weak one? Eh?" The voice came from behind him, low and steady, heavy enough that the air seemed to thicken around us. Jason froze, the grip on my wrist loosening slightly, and I turned to see a man standing a few steps away, leaning against a black Dodge Charger I hadn't noticed before. He was taller than Jason, with black hair slicked back, sharp features, and an energy that seemed to fill the entire parking lot. Even standing casually, he wasn't dressed like someone who just stopped by a grocery store or came from the gym. He wore a fitted black shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal a watch worth more than my annual rent, and his eyes, dark and cool, locked onto Jason. Jason quickly forced a fake smile, the one he used when he felt threatened. "This is a private conversation, man. Walk away." The stranger didn't move, Didn't blink. I said, "Let her go." No anger, no raised voice, but something in his tone made goosebumps lift along my arms. It wasn't a request, nor a command. It was a certainty, the kind spoken by a man who already knew how this would end, and was simply waiting for Jason to understand. Jason's hand reflexively tightened around my wrist again, trying to assert control, but then he released me, backing away with his hands raised in mock surrender. Fine. No need to get involved. We were just talking. I watched him then. For a brief moment, something like worry flickered across his face, maybe even recognition of the situation he was in, but then true fear sparked in his eyes. He turned and hurried toward his truck without looking back. I stood there, my legs trembling so hard I thought I might collapse. The stranger stayed exactly where he was until Jason disappeared from view, then finally looked at me. My fingers curled into fists, my breathing uneven, my heart still pounding. But for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel entirely alone. If you're listening to this and something in the story touches a part of your heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we can continue bringing emotional stories every day. And if you don't mind, could you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We always treasure every word you share. I followed Gabe to the sleek black car he drove like he was born behind its wheel, the rich scent of leather and cologne filling the air as I stepped inside, leaving me both tense and strangely safe. We stayed silent during the drive to his house on Queen Anne Hill, the rain tapping softly against the windshield, streetlights casting warm reflections through the thin layer of rain on the glass, highlighting the distance between the world I had known with Jason and the entirely different one Gabe inhabited. I didn't know whether to look out the window or at him, my heart still racing, my hands gripping the grocery bags, my mind tangled with fear and curiosity. When he stopped in front of a modern house with shimmering glass doors, a shaky breath escaped my chest, though I still didn't dare lower my guard. He opened the door for me, and as I stepped out, my legs wobbled slightly. His gaze brushed over me, not too close, just enough to make me feel seen, safe, in a way Jason never had. Inside, I was struck by the open space, the polished stone floors, the warm golden lights overhead reflecting off every surface. Everything was impeccably clean, almost cold, yet softened by small details, a painting, a plant, a book left slightly open on the table that made the place feel not entirely distant. Gabe closed the door behind me and told me gently that I could set the bags down and rest while he went to the kitchen. He began preparing something light, cooking eggs and making coffee, each movement deliberate and steady, as if he was trying to establish a rhythm of normalcy against the emotional storm swirling in me. I sat on the chair, still gripping the grocery bag, my eyes following his every action, noticing the details, the rolled sleeves, the precise movements of his hands, the flicker of seriousness in his gaze, the quiet sense that he wasn't just a man who stepped in at the right moment, but someone who had walked through shadows I could not yet imagine. I tried breathing deeply, trying to quiet the trembling in my body. He turned and looked at me, his eyes calm and deep, seeing through the fear and hesitation but without judgment, only holding steady as if anchoring me. I began speaking, my voice shaky, telling him about myself, about Jason, about the past 2 years, about trying to survive without constantly looking behind me, about the exhaustion of rebuilding myself piece by fragile piece. Gabe didn't interrupt or offer empty reassurances. He simply listened, every nod and every glance confirming that he was present, that I wasn't speaking into a void. I told him about the sleepless nights, the imagined footsteps, the nightmares where Jason followed me, the way I forced myself to appear strong even when I was falling apart inside, and he stayed quiet, washing his hands, preparing the coffee, moving through the kitchen while keeping a watchful, careful eye on me, every gesture filled with a subtle, respectful kind of care. At one point, I looked directly into his eyes and realized this was the first time in 2 years that I felt truly safe, not pretending, not hiding my fear, but genuinely protected by a man who didn't know me yet was sensitive enough to recognize the pain I carried. The rain continued outside, the warm golden light softening his features, creating a scene that felt both unfamiliar and strangely comforting, and I felt myself breaking open and mending at the same time. My heartbeat slowly steadied, my body trembling less, and I silently told myself that tonight, for at least one night, I wouldn't have to be afraid. For at least one night, I could breathe without fearing Jason would appear out of nowhere. I sat there, fingers wrapped around the warm cup of coffee, my eyes drifting to Gabe, and I realized that the depth in his eyes wasn't just caution or strength but a quiet promise that he wouldn't let anyone hurt me, that I wasn't alone in the dark anymore, that there was a place where my fear could finally rest, and for the first time in a very long time, I believed I could trust in the possibility of a peaceful night. I began telling Gabe about the 2 years I had lived in fear, the 2 years I had tried to bury deep inside my chest, about the months when Jason Hale turned everything in my life into a waking nightmare, dismantling every brick of who I was, stripping away every habit, every small joy, until I could no longer recognize myself. I told him about waking up each morning with the feeling that something was squeezing my heart, about looking around my apartment and wondering if today would be the day he found me again, how every phone ring, every footstep in the hallway made me jump. I remembered the times I tried to run, to find someplace safe, to change my number, to change my locks, but Jason always found a way to reach me, always found a way to remind me that my freedom was temporary. I told him about therapy sessions, the breathing exercises, the self-help books, the relentless push to convince myself that I could exist without constantly looking over my shoulder, that I could live without being devoured by fear. Yet still there were days when the fear swallowed me whole, dragged me to the kitchen floor, where I curled up with tears streaming down, wondering if I would ever escape the hell I was living in. I told him about the late-night calls, the haunting messages, the times he stood outside my door like a ghost from the past, returning to rip apart whatever new life I tried to build, about the moments I had to pretend to be strong, to smile at coworkers, to teach my students, even as my heart fractured inside my chest. I shared how, many times I told myself to leave, how I once asked friends for help, packed a suitcase, then froze in terror at the thought of what would happen if he discovered I was gone. Terrified because deep down I believed no one could really save me. I told Gabe about the memories I tried to erase, about the constant shadow of fear, about the forced smiles and polite conversations masking a deep longing for one moment of safety, one breath that did not feel restricted. I told him about the profound loneliness, the certainty that no one truly saw my pain, about how I learned to survive in silence, how many times tears fell unnoticed, how many screams I swallowed out of fear of the consequences. I told him how I changed every routine, every route to work, every place I ever lingered, trying to erase my presence in the world so Jason could not find me, how none of the temporary apartments, fences, or new locks ever managed to give me real safety. I told him how I learned to live with the fear, to chew on the pain day after day, breath after heavy breath, step after tense step, all while maintaining the image of a normal teacher, so my students never knew the woman before them was living with years of trauma. I told Gabe that even in those moments of deepest weakness, I learned how to protect myself, how to sense danger, how not to run entirely but to endure, to preserve that fragile hope that one day someone would appear who could see me, protect me, and give me a chance to live without Jason's control. I paused, looked directly into his eyes, saw the deep stillness there free of judgment, filled only with listening, and for the first time in 2 years I felt a kind of release, as if I had finally set down part of the burden I had carried for far too long, as if someone truly understood the pain I barely survived, and in that moment, I knew that tonight, for the first time in 2 long years, I would sleep without wondering if Jason would appear, step into a room, or shatter the fragile sense of safety I had just begun to rebuild. I sat watching Gabe move around the kitchen, the safety he radiated easing the tightness in my chest, though a part of me stayed cautious, reminding myself that the man before me was not just a hero appearing at the right moment, but also someone with a past marked by shadows I could not yet see. When he placed a cup of coffee in front of me, I found myself looking into his deep eyes, trying to read what he did not say, and then he began speaking not directly, but slowly, each word lifting a corner of the life he once lived, revealing that Gabe Marston had existed in a world where power, money, and fear dictated everything, where he learned to control every situation and every person around him, where choices others called illegal were simply tools he used to maintain order. I listened with a mixture of fear and fascination, because the way he spoke, gentle yet steady, carried the weight of experiences far harsher than anything could imagine. A life built on decisions made to survive, decisions that now became the very tools ensuring that Jason could not reach me. He told me about witnessing power destroy the vulnerable, about learning that sometimes the law was not enough to protect those who needed protection most, and that was why he trained himself, developed the skills that now served as the shield between me and the man who had once broken me. I saw in him not just a dangerous man, but someone who had wrestled with darkness and refused to be consumed by it. And his fear was not like Jason's wild, unpredictable, cruel. It was controlled, contained, directed toward protecting me. When he sat across from me, I felt the stark contrast between the terror Jason inspired and the power Gabe embodied. A power not meant to confine me, but to stand as a wall between me and harm, a wall I had never dared to hope for. I thought about how he watched my every movement, not to judge or control, but to understand, to see what I was carrying, to listen without interrupting, something Jason never once did. And in that moment I realized Gabe was far from perfect, his past full of choices the world might condemn, yet those very choices made him the only person capable of stopping Jason, the only person who made me feel safe without needing to run again. I told him about the fears that still lingered, the interrupted nights, the tightness in my chest whenever I thought of Jason, and he simply looked at me, quietly and deeply, as if he knew words were no longer enough and only action would matter. I remembered all the times I told myself I had to be strong alone, that no one could help me, but sitting there in front of Gabe, I realized I was no longer alone, that a man who had lived long enough in darkness understood exactly how to protect someone like me, and that understanding loosened part of the fear clinging to my heart. I looked around the vast, immaculate house, perfect to the point of coldness but softened by small details, and understood that all the luxury was more than wealth or status. It was armor. Layers of protection built by someone who knew true danger, someone who understood exactly how men like Jason destroyed lives. My heartbeat slowed. I inhaled deeply, and I recognized in Gabe's stance, in the way he moved, a quiet, unshakable promise that anyone who dared hurt me would face a force beyond their comprehension. I admitted to myself that although I still felt cautious and afraid, for the first time in years I felt truly safe, that tonight I would sleep in peace, that the darkness Jason cast over my life no longer held power over me, and that the man before me with all his shadows was the reason I could finally trust in safety without pretending. The next morning I woke with a strange mix of tension and relief, as if the stories Gabe shared the night before had untangled something inside me. I dressed for work, gathered my teaching materials, tried to steady my breathing, and told myself to act normal, to move through the day as if everything were fine, even though my heart still raced at the thought of Jason appearing out of nowhere. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped, though the sky remained heavy, the droplets scattered on the windshield catching the streetlight like quiet reminders of unease. I focused on the tasks ahead, loaded my keys and bags into the car, took a deep breath, and told myself returning to school was the right choice, that I could not let fear dictate my life anymore. On the drive, my eyes swept every street, every parked car, every passerby, each sound making me jump slightly. Yet I also knew Gabe had ensured my safety, that unseen people were following and protecting me in ways I could not detect, a thought both comforting and strangely humbling. I wondered if I could ever fully trust this new sense of security, but I also understood that this protection was the only reason I dared step outside at all. At Roosevelt Elementary, I tried to maintain composure, greeting colleagues, smiling at students, though I felt an acute sensitivity to every movement around me, to every footstep, laugh, and rustling page. I wanted to feel normal and stay alert all at once, trapped between blending in and guarding myself, between strength and fear. In the classroom, 22 students sat waiting for me to begin, and I focused on letters, simple addition, reading stories with them, though part of me felt watched by invisible threats. Every sound drew my attention, every soft thud or whispered conversation, reminding me of the times Jason appeared unexpectedly outside my door, in grocery stores, in places meant to be safe. I told myself today I would not run. Today I would stand my ground, teach these children, and live a normal day even if my heart trembled. My eyes drifted often to the window overlooking the playground, scanning for unfamiliar cars or silhouettes. At recess, I moved between desks, reminding the kids to stay orderly, then glanced out the window again and noticed a gray car parked at a distance, the person inside, unmoving, doing nothing suspicious. Yet I knew someone was watching over me. My pulse jumped, torn between wanting to scream and feeling reassured by Gabe's arrangements. I exhaled, grounded myself in the laughter and chatter of the children, reminding myself that keeping my job, focusing on them, was how I stayed anchored, how I reclaimed small pieces of the life Jason once shattered. I realized that my first day back in the classroom was not just about teaching letters and numbers. It was a test of facing my fear, of finding calm inside vigilance, of living even when the past still clung to me. And watching the children laugh, I felt a quiet triumph rise in me. I had made it through a morning without running. I had lived this day as myself. I had taught my students not just reading and arithmetic, but something silent and profound: how to hold on to hope even when fear lingers. And outside, somewhere beyond the windows and the gray car, I knew Gabe was still there, still watching, still ensuring that today, just this one day, I didn't have to face the world alone. The entire day passed in a quiet current of tension. Every footstep, every burst of student laughter, every conversation with colleagues sharpening my senses, keeping me alert even as something deep inside me knew there was someone watching over me. Someone Gabe had arranged to ensure I was protected without intruding on the fragile normalcy of my life. From the classroom window, I noticed a gray car parked far away, still and almost invisible, the person inside unmoving, doing nothing but observing, and that very silence made my heart tighten while also granting me a strange sense of reassurance, as if fear no longer had full control over me. When the school day ended and I led the children out to the playground, my eyes kept sweeping the grounds, catching glimpses of that same car holding its position, my pulse quickening, yet I repeated to myself that I was no longer alone, that someone was making sure Jason could not appear out of nowhere and shatter the fragile safety I had only just begun to rebuild. I thought about Gabe, about the way he appeared on that rainy night, the way he stood silently but decisively between me and Jason, the quiet measures he was taking now, placing watchers around me so I could step outside, go to work, live an ordinary day without fearing every passing moment. I absorbed every detail around me, each small movement of the children, every laugh, every footfall in the schoolyard, telling myself all of it was contained, that I was being protected without having to witness Gabe's intervention directly, and that this invisibility made me feel both comforted and cautious, safe yet alert. A complex blend of emotions that, somehow, worked. As I walked through the hallway to check other classrooms, my eyes flicked once more, toward the window, seeing the gray car still there, and I understood that Gabe had placed watchers not only to stop Jason, but to help me learn to walk through the world without being ruled by fear, to help me recover my confidence one step at a time. And I realized that this silent surveillance was not control or confinement but an invisible shield, a wall I no longer needed to build out of my own anxiety. I remembered the times I ran, the months spent in constant hypervigilance, and I recognized that today I was permitted to step outside, smile at my students, talk with colleagues, without worrying that Jason would appear suddenly because of Gabe's quiet protection, because of his careful planning and experience. I felt, for the first time in 2 years, that I could walk down a street, stand in a classroom, live a normal day without collapsing under tension. As dismissal time approached, I guided the children out of the room, closed the door carefully, glanced outside, and saw the regretted, gray car still there, realizing that its silent presence had become part of the rhythm of my day, a reminder that fear still existed, but that I was not facing it alone, that someone was ready to act if Jason appeared, and that thought brought a strange, deep relief. I inhaled slowly, feeling the warmth of my own hand tightening around my folder, realizing that I could go home, prepare for the evening, prepare for the days ahead, with a renewed sense of confidence, knowing I was protected, knowing I no longer had to walk through darkness entirely on my own, knowing fear no longer governed me, and that I was slowly reclaiming control of my life because of the silent guardian I had never met face to face, but could sense in every still figure, every shadow, every unseen watchful gaze. That night, when I returned to my tiny temporary apartment after a long day of teaching, still holding my folder, a physical and emotional exhaustion settled over me, my heart still beating fast from the quiet, surveillance I had felt all day. I set my bag down, drew in a deep breath, and told myself the evening would be calm, that Jason could not appear, that Gabe had arranged everything to keep me safe. But when I checked my phone, a new message appeared on the screen, and its presence sent ice down my spine. The short, white text glowing against the black background read simply, "No one will save you." My hand trembled, my body froze, my heart pounded violently, and the old fear surged back to life, my breath turning shallow as 2 years of terror replayed themselves in a single instant, the rainy night images, the unexpected appearances at my door, the imagined knocks echoing in my head. He was still trying to reach me, still trying to inject terror into my life despite all my precautions, despite the years of distance I had created, despite Gabe's quiet intervention. I sank into a chair, my phone vibrating faintly in my trembling hand, my chest tightening as tears stung the corners of my eyes. I shut them tightly, fighting for control, reminding myself that I was not alone, that Gabe had been watching, protecting, but the sense of helplessness flooded me anyway. I felt small, fragile, as if the fear had become alive again. I remembered every moment Jason had stood before me, the way he used his words, his gaze, his actions to manipulate me, to crush me, and now, just one text, one brief message, was enough to resurrect the terror I thought I had buried. I wondered if I had the strength to face this, wondered whether Gabe was aware of the message, whether he could act fast enough to stop Jason, and I felt a mix of anger and gratitude, realizing I no longer had to fight this alone. I decided to call Gabe, my hand shaking as I dialed, my heart thumping so hard I thought it might tear itself free. When he answered, his voice warm but edged with steel, "Ava, are you all right?" I managed only a single broken phrase. I got a message. No one will save you." My voice cracked, my heart pounding, the urge to cry colliding with the urge to scream. Fear and relief tangled together, as if confessing was both terrifying and freeing. Gabe went silent for a second, and then his voice returned steady, controlled, decisive. I knew he was processing everything, evaluating the situation, and although Jason terrified me in ways no one else ever had, Gabe made me believe this fear could be contained, that there was a force behind me stronger than Jason's malice. He asked for details, and I read the message aloud, feeling the cold echo of Jason's presence in every syllable. Gabe told me not to panic, that he was aware of the situation, that he had anticipated this possibility and already prepared the steps ahead. His calm certainty made me feel both shaky and relieved, as if part of the burden had shifted off my shoulders and onto someone capable of carrying it. I told him I didn't want the police involved yet, afraid that procedures and reports might give Jason more opportunities to play psychological games. Gabe simply acknowledged this, his voice low and firm, telling me he would handle it, that I didn't need to intervene or make any decisions, that he would ensure my safety before taking any further action. And I felt a strange, overwhelming sense of relief wash through me, my heartbeat easing, my limbs trembling less, though a shadow of tension remained, reminding me that fear never vanished instantly, but could be managed. I set the phone down and took a long breath, looking out the window of my apartment. The night was dark, the streetlights casting thin reflections over the leftover dry rain on the pavement, and I realized that the fear that had lived inside me for 2 years still lingered. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, I felt the presence of Gabe's quiet intervention, felt the certainty that I was being watched over, protected, not left alone. And even though Jason could send messages from whatever hell he was, crawling in, I had a shield around me now, a refuge where fear couldn't fully reach. And in that moment, I knew I had found a sliver of peace within the storm Jason was trying so desperately to create, peace enough to breathe, enough to exist, enough to hope that, at last, fear would no longer rule my life. The next morning I woke with a feeling that was both anxious and heavy, knowing that today I would have to say goodbye to the old apartment, the place that had once been my entire world, but now felt tied to fear and painful memories. I packed the essentials, folded my clothes into a suitcase, checked every bag, every work document, every small item to make sure I left nothing behind, my heart beating fast with a tension mixed with emptiness. I took a long breath, told myself to stay calm, stepped out of the bedroom with my hand gripping the suitcase handle, my eyes sweeping across the apartment one last time. The place that had once felt like shelter, now cold and unfamiliar. I opened the door and walked into the hallway, suddenly aware of how every familiar detail now reminded me of Jason, of the times he appeared unexpectedly, of the fear that had lived inside me for 2 long years. And I told myself that this would be the last time I saw this place, that I would not return, that I would not remain a victim of the past. As I went down the stairs, holding the suitcase tightly, my heart pounded in my chest, and then I saw a familiar figure standing at the far end of the corridor, Jason, leaning against the wall with a confidence that made me want to scream, but also made me want to run. The old fear rose like a violent wave, drowning every attempt at calm. My pulse raced, my body stiffened, but I knew I was no longer alone, that Gabe had arranged everything, that this fear was now contained. So I forced myself to inhale deeply and steady my voice when I said his name. "Jason," I whispered, just loud enough to hear, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. He smiled, that old smile that twisted my stomach, his eyes sharp as if he could read every thought in my head, and I felt all the effort of the past 2 years being tested in this single moment. I moved slowly, pressing close to the wall, controlling each step, not willing to let panic take over, though each movement sent my heartbeat thudding harder, sweat forming at my temples as I realized there was no turning back. I had to walk past him to leave this place. He stepped forward, blocking my path, his voice low and cold. "We need to talk." I froze, focusing on my breathing so I wouldn't shake, my eyes steady but my body rigid as memories of threats, manipulation, and helplessness flooded back. And then, like a reflex, a hand appeared between us. Gabe stepped out from the shadows, his dark eyes fixed on Jason, his voice calm but unyielding as he said, "Let her go, now." I felt the air shift instantly. The fear in me didn't disappear, but a strange relief washed through me. Jason tensed, startled by Gabe's sudden presence, his confident smirk fading into confusion and anger. And I knew Gabe had taken control of the situation, that he would not let Jason frighten me again. I moved closer to Gabe, my shoulder brushing his arm, the contact sending a small tremor through me, not of fear, but of reassurance, knowing someone was standing between me and the danger. Jason exhaled sharply, trying to hold on to the illusion of confidence, but Gabe didn't move, his gaze steady and cold. "This is the last time you see her, the last time. And if you dare show up again, there will be consequences you cannot imagine." Jason froze, biting his lip, then finally turned and walked away, leaving behind a space that felt both lighter and still taut with tension. I stood there with my heart racing, my body leaning against Gabe's arm, trying to breathe deeply as I looked at the apartment one last time, knowing this was the moment I stepped away from old fear and into something new. Step by step through the hallway, toward the exit, I could feel Gabe's silent strength beside me, a steady, invisible shield, ensuring that this time I didn't have to face Jason alone. And for the first time in 2 long years, I felt like I truly could leave, truly could step into a life not controlled by fear, knowing someone stood at my side, protecting me, allowing me to believe I would be all right even in a world full of danger. But the moment we stepped outside the building, I saw him again, Jason Hale, standing across the street, like fate refusing to let me go. My heart lurched, my grip on my bag tightened, and my body tensed as the old fear surged back. But this time, I wasn't alone. Gabe was right behind me, his arm brushing mine in a silent message that I was protected. His eyes locked on Jason, dark and cold, delivering a warning without a single word. Jason stepped closer, confidence still painted across his face, his eyes sharp and his voice low with menace. "Ava, you think you can hide from me forever?" My stomach twisted, the urge to scream and run, rising like instinct, but I knew running would only give him power. I shut my eyes for a moment, took a breath, repeated the word calm inside my head, and the weight of Gabe's presence kept my knees from buckling. Gabe stepped forward, closing the gap between him and Jason with only a few strides, his gaze unblinking, frozen, that cold certainty radiating from him like a wall of steel. The old fear inside me barely had time to flare before it was overwhelmed by Gabe's quiet dominance. Jason clenched his fists, trying desperately to maintain his false bravado, his voice dripping with mockery as he said, "You're still scared of me, aren't you?" But Gabe never looked away from him. And that single look, that silent, razor-sharp stare, made Jason pause, his body shifting backward ever so slightly, the confidence in his smile thinning. For the first time in 2 years, someone wasn't just seeing my fear, they were standing in front of it, confronting it, blocking it with a strength Jason couldn't match. I pressed closer to Gabe, feeling safety wrap around me even as my heart hitched in my chest. Every breath felt uneven, every muscle tense, but Gabe's presence steadied me. With the slightest tilt of his head, with only the faintest shift in his expression, Gabe made Jason freeze in place, fear flickering across Jason's eyes. He tried again to intimidate me, spitting out words meant to crush my spirit. "You'll never escape me." But Gabe didn't say a word. He simply stood there, the cold fire in his gaze cutting through every threat. And the silence itself became a warning. I could feel the power radiating off him, not violent or reckless, but contained and absolute. Jason stepped back, his facade cracking, his hands trembling just enough for me to notice. Gabe took another step toward him, a single stride that swallowed the space between them, his voice low but heavy with finality. "This is the last time. If you come near her again, it won't be a warning." That was all it took. Jason stopped, shoulders tense, muttering through clenched teeth, "You don't know who you're messing with." Then he turned and walked away, his steps loud, uneven, retreating without daring to look back. I felt something break open inside me, a pressure releasing, replaced by a slow, trembling relief. My heart began to steady, though a thread of vigilance still lingered, woven into my body after years of fear. I exhaled, leaning into Gabe, feeling both shaky and safe, realizing that for the first time in 2 years I was no longer completely powerless. Someone was standing for me, not asking me to be strong while watching from afar, but speaking with his presence, with his eyes, with a force that Jason could no longer override. We continued toward the car, each step still taut with nerves but lighter than before. I watched Jason disappear down the street, feeling both unsettled and deeply reassured, knowing that today I hadn't run, knowing I had stood my ground, and for the first time in far too long, I felt the true weight of protection not imagined, not hoped for, but standing beside me, shielding every step, every breath. And I knew that tonight, even if fear still lingered, I would sleep safely, because Gabe had extinguished every threat Jason tried to ignite, with nothing more than the power of a single, unwavering gaze. The next morning I woke with an unfamiliar feeling, part of me still tense after the confrontation with Jason, yet another part strangely relieved because I knew I was no longer alone. Gabe had arranged everything, and fear no longer gripped my heart the way it once had. I dressed simply, prepared my materials for class, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted my bag, but I breathed deeply to steady myself. When I walked out to the car, the early sunlight filtered through the tree branches and glimmered against the rain-damp pavement, left from the night before, creating a scene both peaceful and quietly reminding me that life continued, even if worry remained. On the drive to Roosevelt Elementary, I looked at the familiar street views, the rows of trees, the cars parked along the curb, but this time, instead of being consumed by fear, I carried the knowledge that someone was silently watching over me. Gabe had arranged everything so that I could move through the world without the constant threat of danger, and that thought made me feel both safe and curious, wanting to believe in that protection. When I entered the classroom, I was welcomed by 22 bright, eager faces. My heart softened a little. Their smiles, their innocent questions, their little hands raised high to speak, helped me forget some of the lingering fear. I began the lesson, guiding them through addition problems, reading books together, trying to focus on each reaction, each small detail. The blend of normalcy and vigilance made my heart beat, fast yet gradually steady. During the break, I walked out into the hallway, my eyes drifting toward the schoolyard and the street beyond, noticing once again the gray car parked quietly in the distance. The person inside remained still, but instead of panic, I felt a strange sense of safety, knowing Gabe had arranged for me to be watched over without having to see him directly. I realized that this silent concern was slowly creating a fragile sense of trust, a belief that I might be able to step outside, live a normal day, without running. When class ended, I led the children to the playground, my attention on every movement and every laugh, but instead of fear anchoring itself inside me, I felt a wave of relief knowing someone was protecting me. Gabe was watching, ready to act if Jason appeared, and that allowed me to breathe deeply, keep my rhythm steady, and recognized the quiet power surrounding me, something I had never experienced before. Something that made me want to believe in safety again, to trust Gabe. At noon, when I walked to the small cafe near the school, Gabe appeared behind me, carrying 2 cups of coffee, setting one gently in front of me. The warm scent brought an unexpected comfort. He sat down without many words, simply watching me with those deep, steady eyes, and in them existed a quiet kind of care, an assurance that I was no longer alone. I looked at him and saw a softness I hadn't noticed before in the man who had always seemed unshakably strong, almost invincible, and for the first time, I felt trust beginning to form, a small but growing belief that I could lean on someone, that I no longer had to withstand everything alone. We sat there quietly, sipping our coffee, sharing a closeness that did not intrude. I talked about small things, the class, the students, their stories, and he listened without judgment, without offering unsolicited advice, only being present. And that presence made me feel lighter, and a curiosity about him began to grow. For the first time in years, I felt I could trust someone, that there was a person willing to stand between me and fear, willing to protect me without causing harm, and in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of coffee and the gentle noon light, I realized that trust, however small, was beginning to take root inside me, slowly but firmly, like a seed planted in dry soil finally given a chance to sprout, creating a peace I hadn't felt in a very long time. That afternoon, as the students filed out and the classroom grew quiet, I stayed behind gathering papers and organizing materials for the next day. From the hallway, I heard tense voices, 2 men arguing, their tones sharp, rising from the direction of the administrative office. I moved toward the door, standing on my toes and listening carefully without wanting to be seen. The words I heard made my heart pound, partly out of fear that Jason might be involved, but also because I knew this had to do with Gabe. A deep, firm voice filled with frustration said, "You're getting too soft, too attached to her," and another voice, colder but steady, responded, "I know, but I can't change that." My chest tightened as I tried to make sense of it, and I realized Gabe was facing pressure from people around him, people inside his organization, people who belonged to the dark world he had once led. They doubted how he was treating me, doubted how his emotions were interfering with his work. The argument continued, voices talking about responsibility, power, the risk of losing control. And I understood Gabe was balancing 2 worlds, the criminal world he once commanded, and the normal world where I existed. And suddenly I understood that his worry was not about possession or control, but about protecting me while keeping order in his world. I stood silently in the hallway, absorbing every word, every tense pause, realizing that the decisions Gabe had made to protect me from last night until now were not simple reflexes, but part of a complex strategy, one that required him to face pressure both outside and inside. I glimpsed a part of him I had never seen before, a part that wanted to protect me without frightening me, a part willing to stand up against people who had once been his allies, a part being tested in ways I had never imagined. I heard Gabe's deep voice explaining firmly that I was a priority, that protecting me mattered more than any threat or any rumor. In that moment, I felt both anxious and comforted, realizing Gabe wasn't just confronting Jason, he was confronting his own world, his own past, to keep me safe. Something I never believed a man with his history could choose to do. The argument softened, and I heard Gabe say quietly, "I can't let her face the risk." The other voice replied reluctantly, "But you know how to control this." I could feel the tension in every word and rhythm, but also the certainty. And in that moment I realized Gabe wasn't perfect, that he had lived in darkness, but now he was using that past to protect me, to let me step back into life without trembling. It made me feel equal parts humbled and relieved. I stood still, my hand resting on the desk, my heartbeat racing as I stared at the closed office door, understanding that what I was hearing wasn't just an argument, it was a truth I had never known, that Gabe was fighting not just external enemies but the weight of his relationships, responsibilities, and past, all so I could be safe. That realization moved me deeply and made me wonder whether I had the courage to understand, to trust, to walk forward with him. When the footsteps faded and the door finally shut, I exhaled slowly, closing my eyes for a moment, feeling fear and relief intertwine as I realized I was standing before a complex but essential truth. Gabe was not only a protector but a man trying to balance everything so that I could keep living, and the fear inside me loosened slightly, making room for a new sense of trust, a hope that I might no longer be alone, that someone truly saw my fear, my pain, my resolve, and quietly, steadily, chose to stay. That evening, as the warm yellow light settled softly over the living room, Gabe and I sat side by side on the large sofa in the temporary apartment he had arranged for me. The silence was so complete that we could hear nothing but the ticking of the clock and the sound of our own breathing. I took a slow sip of my still warm coffee, watching the faint curl of steam drift upward, my heart still stirred by everything I had overheard behind the scenes, the arguments, the quiet battles, the decisions he was forced to make in order to protect me. And I realized that what I felt now was a mixture of respect, gratitude, and a deep, growing curiosity about who he truly was. I let out a quiet sigh and tried to steady myself by focusing on the small details in the room, but the question pressed up from somewhere deep inside. "Are you changing because of me?" My voice was soft but unmistakably sharp, part wonder, part fear. I lifted my gaze to Gabe and saw his eyes reflecting the warm golden lamplight, deep, shadowed, layered with unspoken thoughts. He remained silent for a long moment, as if weighing his answer carefully, and I sensed that whatever he said would hold a truth about who he was becoming, about how he was choosing to stand beside me, about the actions and decisions I had not witnessed but could now feel shaping the air between us. He drew in a slow, steady breath. His voice, when it came, was low, tired in a way, yet unmistakably certain. "I don't know. I can't give you an easy answer. I look at myself, and I look at you at the way you move through the world after the years you spent terrified, and I realize I want to do everything I can to protect you, to become someone worthy of the trust you've given me. But it's not only because of you, it's because I want to be better than the man I used to be." His words struck me, like a quiet tremor. I felt something inside me shift, touched, confused, and overwhelmed by how complex he truly was. I had only ever seen the strong, cold, controlled side of him. I hadn't imagined he could soften, that he could care without dominating. I swallowed and tried to keep my voice steady. "Are you changing for me, or for yourself?" Gabe fell silent again, his eyes fixed on mine, as if urging me to understand that the answer wasn't simple, that his actions came from a tangle of responsibility, emotion, and the reverberations of his past choices. When he finally spoke, his words were slow and deliberate. "You see it. I'm not who I was. And having you in my life, watching the way you trust me, the way you lean on me without asking for anything, has forced me to look at myself differently, to realize I could choose another way, that I don't have to be the man who relies on power, or fear, or force." His words settled into me with a warmth that was almost frightening in its tenderness. I felt both comforted and unsettled, knowing this change wasn't entirely for me, nor entirely for him, but something between us, something created from necessity, fear, trust, and survival. A kind of connection I had never experienced before. I took another sip of coffee, meeting his gaze again. His eyes held a rare combination of resolve and gentleness, strength and restraint. I asked quietly, "So, can I trust that you won't go back to who you were? That fear won't control what you do?" He looked straight into me, not with empty promises, but with the solid weight of someone who meant every word. "I'm trying, and you know this. I don't promise anything unless I'm prepared to live with the consequences." Something inside me softened. Trust, fragile but real, stirred like a small flame in a dark room. I exhaled, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the reality sink in. Maybe trust didn't require a perfect answer. Maybe it only required presence, consistency, and the willingness to see each other fully, flaws, shadows, and all. And there, in the quiet glow of the evening, with the scent of warm coffee lingering in the air, I felt a small but growing hope that I could walk forward with him, that the changes we were both making were not only for each other but also for ourselves. For the first time in many years, I felt I could lean on someone without fear. Later that night, when I stepped into the new apartment Gabe had arranged, exhaustion from the long day pressed heavily against my shoulders. I set my bag down, breathing out slowly, telling myself everything had gone well, that I could finally relax after weeks of tension. But before I could let my body unwind, my phone buzzed sharply on the table, its screen lighting up the dim room with an eerie glow. The moment I read the message, my heart clenched painfully. "I won't let you go." The white letters on the black screen hit me like a blade. I froze, my hands trembling, my chest squeezed tight as old memories surged back: the sleepless nights, the unexpected appearances, the suffocating fear that had owned me for 2 long years. One message was all it took to make me feel as though everything was collapsing again. I wanted to scream, to cry, but terror locked my body in place. I forced myself to breathe, reminding myself I wasn't alone anymore, reminding myself that Gabe had prepared everything, but the helplessness still flooded me. I sank onto the couch, clutching the phone, my heartbeat pounding wildly, tears gathering at the edges of my eyes. I tried to steady myself, telling myself Gabe would know how to handle this, that I didn't have to fight this alone. With trembling fingers, I texted him. I got a message. "Jason's threatening me." I don't know what to do. Only a few minutes passed before he replied. "Are you safe?" His voice in the message, calm, deep, but edged with steel, made my breath catch. "Yes, but I'm shaking. I can't breathe right." I read the message, again and again, each word tightening the fear inside me. Jason was escalating, testing me, testing Gabe, testing the fragile safety I had only just begun to believe in. Gabe reassured me, his words steady and certain. "I know. Don't panic. Everything is already in motion." I felt a delicate thread of relief weave through the panic, as though responsibility was shifting away from me and into his hands. I looked around the room, the soft ceiling light, the couch, the desk, and yet the fear crept into every shadow, every corner, reminding me that Jason had never stopped watching, never stopped trying to control me. I tightened my grip on the phone, reading his threat again. "I won't let you go." The old terror rose like a tide, filling my lungs, my throat, my thoughts. Then, within minutes, Gabe was there, moving quickly but quietly into the room. His hand settled firmly on my shoulder, his eyes deep and steady, and with one look, a wave of protective strength washed over me. The fear didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. My voice trembled as I whispered, "You knew he would message, didn't you?" He nodded, no extra words needed. His eyes told me everything: that Jason would not touch me, that steps had already been taken, that the walls around me were stronger than anything Jason could send through a phone screen. I leaned into him, my breath uneven but gradually slowing. Gabe took my phone, scanned the message, traced its origin, made calls, arranged more protection, each movement precise, practiced. I watched him, feeling both shaken and relieved. For the first time in years, someone else was fighting the threat aimed at me. Someone else was standing between me and the darkness. All night, I stayed beside Gabe, my gaze drifting to my phone every few minutes, my heartbeat slowly easing back into rhythm. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled me. It was contained, held firmly by the presence of the man beside me, and for the first time in so long, I knew I could sleep safely, at least for tonight. No matter how Jason tried to terrify me, I had a wall of strength standing guard. And in that trembling, fragile moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: safety. A rising trust, and a small, steady hope that fear no longer owned me. That night, after everything had finally settled and Jason had been pushed back for the moment, I sat on the sofa in the living room with my hands wrapped tightly around a warm cup of coffee, my heart still trembling from the threatening message I had just received. Yet an unfamiliar sense of relief washed over me when Gabe stepped into the room, his deep, steady gaze resting on me with a seriousness softened by something gentle beneath it. And he said, "You will stay in my room tonight. I need to know you are safe." His voice was low but firm, not a question but a quiet command, a request I could not refuse, and my heart tightened, torn between fear and an instinctive wish to agree, because I knew this was not control but protection, a kind of silent care I had never experienced from a man as strong as he was. I stood and followed him down the hallway, a cold shiver running down my spine, each step shaky yet certain, my heart pounding, my body still reacting to fear and the message that had unsettled every inch of me. But his presence was like a shield, and with every step I realized that for the first time in years, I was allowed to lean on someone without feeling weak or guilty. He opened the door to a small, warm room where the light was soft and the bedding carried the clean scent of new fabric, and he stood beside me, his eyes never leaving mine as he said, "Rest here. I will be outside, but I need to be able to see you." And his voice held that mixture of firmness and gentleness that struck something deep in my chest, leaving me grateful and unsettled all at once. I set my suitcase and bag down, still trembling, but the fear eased slightly, knowing he would not be far, and he stood there in silence for a few seconds, his steady eyes tracing every detail of me, as though confirming my safety before stepping back, pulling a chair close to the door, placing it with a careful distance that gave me space, while letting me feel the weight of his protective presence. I took a long breath, reminding myself to inhale slowly and evenly, watching every movement he made, a complicated blend of comfort, anxiety, the urge to cry, and the desire to finally rest. I listened to his footsteps moving around the living room, every small sound strangely reassuring, and I reminded myself that staying in his room tonight was not surrender or weakness but permission to trust, to let someone guard me from the danger hovering outside, from Jason and anyone else who might prey on my loneliness. I sat on the bed, still trembling, and watched as Gabe settled into the chair, his eyes never leaving me, and in that moment I felt an unspoken but powerful shield settle around me, a feeling I had never known before, the sense that whatever happened, I would not face it alone, and the fear that had gripped me for 2 years, though not gone, was now held back by the boundary of his presence. I looked at him and whispered, "Thank you for everything," my voice shaking, and he gave a small, quiet smile, saying nothing, his eyes deep and steady but softened by something warm, and that alone made peace settle into my bones. I lay down, pulled the blanket over myself, my heart still pounding but steadier, my body loosening for the first time in so long, and as I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, I felt something I had not felt in years, the possibility of sleeping without being entirely alone, the knowledge that someone was right there, willing to protect me without being asked, and that certainty made me feel seen, valued, and safe, and I drifted in that moment listening to his quiet movements in the room beyond, the trembling fading, replaced by a strange calm, a small but powerful trust beginning to take root, that tonight I would not be afraid, that I would truly rest, truly be protected, and for the first time in the long, heavy years behind me, fear could step aside long enough for peace to enter. In the middle of the night, when the city had gone silent, I was fighting to fall asleep after hours of trembling anxiety, when the phone on the bedside table buzzed over and over, and my heart jolted, my hands shaking as I grabbed it, and Gabe's low voice echoed through the speaker, "Are you awake?" Something happened, and I shot upright, my heart pounding so hard it hurt, the light from the screen revealing my tired but alert face, and Gabe continued, "Jason crossed a line. He tried to break into your apartment. The security cameras caught him. The police have been called," and I felt my entire body turn cold, trembling as the memories of the last 2 years crashed over me. Sleepless nights, sudden appearances, whispered threats, and now, something real, something dangerously close. I pushed the blankets aside and sat up, breathing hard, trying to steady myself as Gabe said he was already on his way, that he had called for additional protection, and I listened to the faint sounds outside the room, every noise echoing like it was inside my chest, unsure whether to panic or feel relieved, but knowing Gabe had taken control. He said, "You do not have to do anything. Stay in the room, keep your phone with you, I will handle it." And I closed my eyes, forcing a deep breath even as tension wrapped itself around every nerve, each hallway noise, each flicker of light pulling old fear to the surface. I heard police voices, footsteps outside the apartment door, the crackle of radios, and knew Jason had been caught trying to force the lock, the truth hitting me with both terror and release, because this time the law was stepping in, not just caution, not just avoidance, but consequences. Gabe arrived and stepped into the room, his eyes deep and alert in the low light, and when I whispered, "Will everything be all right?" he nodded and said all actions had been taken. The police were present, the camera footage was clear. Jason would have to face what he had done, and I felt relief slowly spreading through me, thin but real, even as my hands continued to shake. Gabe told me Jason had been arrested on the spot, charged with attempted unlawful entry and violation of the restraining order, with paperwork already filed to prevent him from slipping through the cracks, and a mixture of fear and relief washed over me, realizing that for the first time in 2 long years, something solid and legal was standing between me and him. I leaned into Gabe's shoulder as the trembling faded little by little, and he set his hand on my arm, his eyes deep but gentle as he asked if I was all right, and I nodded, still shaky but finally, truly safer than I had felt in so long, and he smiled faintly, not needing to say much, because his presence alone was the strongest protection I could have asked for. We sat quietly while he checked his phone, confirming every detail from the police and security footage, and for the first time in years I did not feel hunted, the fear still present but pushed back by everything Gabe had prepared, by the law, by the extra protection outside. I leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly, my heart heavy and relieved at the same time, knowing Jason had crossed a line he could not erase, that he would now face consequences he could no longer threaten his way out of, and I looked at Gabe with eyes full of gratitude and trust, realizing that the trembling that had controlled my life for so long was slowly giving way to a fragile but undeniable calm, to the understanding that I was no longer alone, that for the first time in 2 years I could feel what it meant to be truly protected, truly safe, and that fear no longer held absolute power over me, at least not tonight. The next morning, I still carried the trembling holdover from the night before, though this time it mixed with a fragile relief, knowing that Jason had officially been arrested and no longer held any direct power over me, and Gabe stood beside me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee in his hand, his gaze deep and steady yet gentle as he said, "I have leverage now, no need for force," his voice low and certain without an ounce of threat, and I raised my brows, curious, wanting him to explain, and he continued, "I have gathered every piece of evidence, his threats, his attempted break-ins, his violations of the restraining order, even financial details and work information that would cost him dearly if he tried to challenge the law." A mixture of shock and relief washed over me as I realized for the first time that Gabe was not protecting me only with strength or presence, but with preparation, strategy, and the ability to make the man who had terrorized me face consequences without a single violent confrontation. I looked at him, and my voice trembled as I asked, "But, are you sure?" And he simply nodded. "Everything is ready. I have made certain Jason has no way to harass you again. And I prepared all of this so we would never have to resort to violence." And inside me something loosened and tightened all at once, an anxious relief knowing that for the first time in years, I could exhale without fearing Jason would suddenly reappear. Gabe set his cup down, his eyes never leaving me as he said, "Your safety no longer depends only on me standing next to you. It depends on the fact that the one threatening you now understands every wrong action will lead to consequences he cannot avoid." And I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the trembling settle slowly, my heart still beating fast but no longer out of panic, and I sensed that for the first time I could trust a protection that was not just physical presence but strategy, foresight, and control, something so reassuring it almost made it hard to breathe. When I asked, "But what if he is stubborn? What if he tries again?" Gabe gave a faint smile, not threatening, but certain as he said, "Then he will face consequences harsher than anything he can imagine. Everything has been prepared. I have studied every angle, and you will be safe." And hearing that, something small but steady sparked inside me, a fragile trust that for the first time in 2 years, I could truly believe no one would hurt me again, at least not directly, and that safety had been built in a quiet, intelligent way, not with intimidation, but with consequences that Jason would be forced to learn. Gabe continued, "We do not need violence. Everything is handled with intelligence and control, and that is how I want to protect you." And I felt the blend within him, gentle and strong, protective without being oppressive, certain without being controlling, as I sat silently, listening to every word, every soft rhythm in his voice, realizing that his presence protected more than my body. It shielded my spirit. It gave me a sense of safety I had never known. I let out a slow breath, my hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup, my eyes resting on him with gratitude and trust as I whispered, "Thank you, Gabe, for everything." And he only smiled, not needing many words, his deep but tender gaze saying all that mattered. "You do not need to thank me. Knowing you are safe is enough," he said, and my heart softened, the trembling turning into relief. The fear of the past 2 years sliding out of my body like something long overdue, replaced by trust in Gabe, in his strategy, in the quiet intelligence and determination he wielded without violence. I looked around the room, the soft light brushing the walls, the quiet ticking of the clock in the background, and felt safety spreading through me like warmth after a long winter, realizing that for the first time in years, fear was no longer ruling me, that a man imperfect but steady, intelligent, and profoundly responsible was standing behind me, protecting me in every way he could, and that truth both soothed and overwhelmed me, knowing that for the first time in 2 long years, I could truly sleep without terror gripping the edges of my mind, knowing nothing and no one could frighten me directly anymore because of Gabe and the extraordinary preparation he had set in place. That evening, after everything had calmed following Jason's arrest, I sat in the living room with my warm cup of coffee, my heartbeat steady but still carrying leftover tension, the soft ceiling light casting a tired but alert glow across my face, and I watched Gabe sorting through a few documents on the table, his eyes occasionally lifting toward me, observant yet gentle, and in that moment I realized that the safety I now felt also carried a new fear, the fear of dependence, the fear of relying on someone so strong, so controlled, so capable, the fear that if I leaned on him too much, I would lose pieces of the independence and identity I had fought so hard to rebuild after 2 years of living in fear. I set the cup down, my fingertips brushing the table as my chest tightened, and in a trembling voice trying to remain calm, I said, "Gabe, I am afraid of depending on you too much, and I do not know if I can still stay myself if that happens." And he looked up with those deep, steady eyes, not pushing, not correcting, simply listening, and that alone startled me, because I had become used to hiding my fears, to carrying everything alone, never letting myself rely on anyone, and now I was forced to admit the raw truth. I never wanted dependence, but I had also never felt this safe. I continued, my voice breaking. "I know I should leave, live independently, stand on my own, but I still want to stay. I cannot explain this feeling. My heart wants to run from dependence, but also wants to stay close enough to feel protected, cared for, held by someone who actually pays attention." And Gabe did not speak immediately. He simply sat there silently, his gaze deep and steady as he listened to every word and every heartbeat inside my chest. And that silence allowed me to release some of the weight I had carried for so long. I felt seen in a way I had not in years, felt that he understood my fear, that he was not trying to direct me but waiting for me to choose, and that both calmed and frightened me. I let out a long breath, closing my eyes for a moment as I realized that the fear of dependence was not gone, but I was facing it, challenging myself by admitting that maybe choosing to stay, choosing to trust, choosing to lean on someone after years of surviving alone was not weakness but courage, the courage to accept safety, the courage to accept protection I had never had. Gabe placed a gentle pressure on my hand, his eyes soft yet firm as he said, "You do not have to worry about dependence. I only want you to know you are protected, that if you choose to stay, it is because you want to, not because you have to." And I looked at him with tears rising, the trembling in my chest easing for the first time, realizing that his presence was not a cage but a support, and for the first time in years, I felt that leaning on someone did not mean losing myself but perhaps finding strength and peace in ways I never could alone. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand, the steady rhythm of his breath, the certainty in every movement he made, and I told myself that even though I feared dependence, I still chose to stay, chose to trust, chose to feel safety and real care. And for the first time I realized that choice did not weaken me. It offered me a chance to heal, to reclaim myself after years of fear and solitude. I looked at Gabe and whispered softly, "I will stay, at least for tonight," and he smiled, his eyes both gentle and deep, not needing to say a single additional word because his presence alone told me everything. And as I lay down, the trembling that had followed me for so long finally began to fade, replaced by calm and trust, by the understanding that even though I feared dependence, I still had the right to choose, the right to trust, and for the first time in 2 long years, I felt that I could stay, that I could lean on someone and still remain myself, and for the first time, Gabe's presence did not only protect me from danger, but gave me a sense of freedom within my choice, a feeling of being seen, respected, and safe. A week later, the apartment was still quiet, with the gentle morning light filtering through the curtains as I sat on the sofa holding a warm cup of coffee, my heart fluttering with a mix of nervousness and relief knowing that today was Jason's court hearing, and Gabe stood beside me with a gaze that was deep yet warm as his low, steady voice said, "Everything has been prepared. You only need to stay calm." And I inhaled slowly, trying to steady the heartbeat that still pounded with a blend of anticipation and hope, because for the first time in 2 years, I was about to face the true ending of the nightmare Jason had brought into my life. On the way to the courthouse, Gabe drove slowly, his eyes checking on me now and then, as his hand rested on my shoulder in a gesture both protective and gentle, and I felt the steadiness of him, knowing that whatever Jason intended, we had prepared everything, and all I needed to do was focus on myself, stay composed, and trust the unwavering presence of Gabe beside me. When we arrived, strict security surrounded the courthouse, officers and attorneys moving quickly, but I no longer felt the old panic thanks to Gabe standing near. Fear was contained now. During the hearing, Jason was brought out with a defiant expression that could not hide the anxiety in his eyes, and I saw him through the glass panel, my heart pounding, but this time with the awareness that justice was finally moving toward me. My attorney and Gabe presented all the evidence, the threats, the break-in attempts, the violations of the restraining order, along with every legal record and financial detail Gabe had gathered, each piece organized with logic and precision, leaving Jason with nothing he could deny. I sat silently, listening to every word, my heart beating fast yet lighter with every moment, as I felt justice tilt toward me, and for the first time in 2 long years, I understood that the power in my life no longer belonged to fear, but to preparation and truth. When the judge announced Jason's sentence, a wave of release washed through my entire body. He would face jail time, the no-contact order, mandatory counseling, and every attempt to harass me would now be punished, and I exhaled as tears streamed down my cheeks, this time tears of relief, not fear, as my heartbeat eased and I realized that I was finally free, not only physically but emotionally. Gabe held my hand, his gaze deep and tender as he asked, "Are you all right?" And I nodded, with a trembling but firmer voice, "Thank you." And he smiled, saying nothing more because his eyes already told me that the nightmare was over, that I was free now, in every sense. On the drive home, I looked out the window at the city, everything familiar yet somehow different, the golden afternoon light, the quiet hum of the traffic, everything felt calmer, and I realized that 2 long years of enduring, worrying, fearing, and surviving alone had finally ended, and I was stepping into a new chapter with real freedom. When we returned to the apartment, I walked in and felt the space shift, no longer shadowed by the past, and Gabe came in behind me, resting his hand on my shoulder with that same deep, gentle gaze as I let out a long breath, the old trembling dissolving into trust and calm, and I realized I could breathe without glancing over my shoulder, that the fear that had gripped me for 2 years was now locked behind me. I sat on the sofa with my coffee still in hand, looking at Gabe, whose eyes carried both tenderness and resolve, and I said, "It's finally over." And he nodded, "Yes, it's over." And I understood that I was truly free, free to live, to choose, to breathe, to feel safe, and to move forward without the ghost of Jason chained to me. I closed my eyes, feeling each breath, each heartbeat, and for the first time in 2 long years, I felt peace, freedom, and strength, knowing that justice had been served, fear had been pushed back, and I could begin a new life with Gabe beside me, with protection, with trust, and with a heart that knew it had survived fear and discovered what freedom truly meant. The next morning, I woke with a new sensation, one without fear or worry threading through every heartbeat, as the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains brightened the room and my spirit, and I saw Gabe sitting at the table with that deep, warm gaze, as he said gently, "You are not running anymore," his voice low and steady, and I smiled, feeling that the trembling of the past 2 years had fully dissolved, replaced by a peace and trust I never dared believe I could feel. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew I was truly free, free to live, to choose, and most importantly, free to love and be loved safely. 2 years of fear, of sleepless nights, of panic triggered by footsteps, had finally closed, Jason had been held accountable, and I had learned that real strength did not come from running or enduring alone, but from facing things, seeking help, and choosing to stand up for myself. And I chose Gabe not because he was strong, but because he showed me the value of safety, respect, and trust. I chose myself by accepting protection and genuine care, by refusing to run from fear anymore, by choosing to live fully and courageously. Gabe held my hand with eyes both tender and profound, and in that moment I realized that every pain, every tear, every fear had meaning because they helped me grow, taught me to cherish peace, to trust people who deserved it, and most importantly, to know that I myself was worthy of being protected, seen, and valued. I looked around the room, the warm home Gabe had prepared so I could feel safe and live fully, and I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with air that finally felt free, and for the first time in many years, I felt completely liberated, free to laugh, to cry, to feel happiness and peace, and that made me understand a precious truth. No one can give you true freedom except yourself, but sometimes the right protection and help from another person is the key that opens that door. I want to share this lesson with everyone listening to Ava's story today. No matter how difficult life becomes, no matter how dark the shadows that follow you, you can still rise, seek help, find someone you trust, and choose to protect yourself. And that choice does not make you weak, it makes you stronger, braver, and more alive. If this story moved you or stirred something deep within you, do not forget to subscribe to our channel so you can follow many meaningful videos every day. Click like and share so others can feel it too. And please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Tell us how this story touched your heart or how it connects to your real-life experiences, because your words help us understand the emotions each of you is carrying and help us build a community of empathy and shared strength. I wish everyone watching this video good health, joyful days, and a peaceful life. May you cherish yourself and those around you, find calm in your heart, and discover joy in the smallest moments. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next video, where we will bring you more heartfelt, meaningful, and inspiring stories to help you feel life more fully and more bravely. Keep your heart open to the good and the safe, because each one of us deserves to live, to be loved, and to be protected.